Morning.
Morning.
Hope you enjoyed the holiday. Well, some people have to work on those holidays. Hopefully, not everyone. Had some time with family or friends and food. So, I'd like to speak this morning a bit about the Buddha Shakyamuni's awakening, which we will celebrate next week on Sunday with a ceremony that's referred to as the Jodo-e. Jodo means to attain to the way, and e is like a gathering. So it's an assembly to celebrate Shakyamuni Buddha's attaining to the way, which is the kind of precise translation of how that's written in Chinese. In English, we have a tendency to just talk about the Buddha's enlightenment. We use that term all the time. If you're interested in some of the roots of the language there, I encourage you to go, and it's very easy to find on the internet people who are writing about this. But even the term enlightenment is so wrapped up with a Western concept of understanding, and it was used, it was applied to the Buddha, and our conception of what awakening is about has been so influenced by the use of the word enlightenment and how it comes out of a Western philosophical tradition. Anyway, if all of that sounds like, what are you talking about? Just forget I said anything. If you were like, oh, that sounds interesting, Google, and there will be plenty there. But in Chinese, the way that we write this, not always, but typically when we talk about the Buddha's enlightenment, which we celebrate yearly, December 8th in this tradition is the date that is chosen for that. The term is attaining to the way. And it relates to the Buddha's exclamation under the Bodhi tree when the rising of the morning star, and he saw that, and that said that that's when all fetters, all hindrances dropped away, and he made the statement, I, all beings in the great earth, attain to the way at the same time. Right? So that term, attaining to the way, Jodo. So we celebrate this, as I've said, every year. December 8th is the day. It comes 8 months after the Buddha's birth, which we celebrate on April 8th. So there's kind of three main celebrations in the year that have to do with the life events of the Buddha. His birth on April 8th, enlightenment on the 8th of December, and then February 15th is his passing into perfect nirvana, or what is conventionally called death. And so this celebration is both important for what it is, but it's also important to see that it lands within a cycle, a liturgical cycle of our tradition. And there's a real meaning to those liturgical cycles, or a real significance to those liturgical cycles. And I was talking about that a little bit last week. That one way to think about it is it just reminds us of these important things. And if you set a date once a year, you got to come back and think about it. Okay? So that's part of what liturgy does. It just requires you to think about it, to encounter it on a yearly basis. But there's also something else, which is it's not just the reminder of particular teachings, etc., but it is drawing close to, or realizing that we are always close to, or always drawing close to, this fact of the Buddha's awakening, or the fact of the Buddha's attaining to the way. And liturgy asks us to encounter again and again and again that actuality. Not just thinking like, oh, well, the teaching's the same all the time, so I just, once a year I have to get around to actually paying attention to it. But this is a way of saying that, no, we're actually in a cycle of drawing close to the Buddha's awakening again and again and again. And the encounter that happens there is not just a kind of flat terrain. We happen to pick up a book about the Buddha's life, but that we are in a process that has been unfolding for thousands of years now. Now, if we talk about celebration, rohatsu is the term that refers to the Buddha's awakening, particularly to the meditation retreat that surrounds the Buddha's awakening. So next Sunday, after we have the Jodo-e here, then we'll enter into a week-long meditation time, which is known as rohatsu sesshin. And then we'll end the practice term the following Sunday with the term closing and shosan, which is a formal question and answer period. That term rohatsu, it's interesting. It just means the 8th day of the month of Ro, which in our calendar now is December. There was a lunar calendar in Japan that was used, and there were 10 months, and the last month of the year was known as Ro, and the 8th day of the last month of Ro is Rohatsu. Right? So that's what the term Rohatsu means. It's interesting to me that the Buddha's awakening day and Rohatsu coincided in the Japanese tradition, because the Rohatsu was a very important festival. It was the festival where people would bring together all of the things of that year. Maybe a bit like our Thanksgiving, kind of a harvest festival, but also all other pieces of things that had happened over the year. And they would bring them together, and they would build an altar, and they would place these things on the altar and then offer them to the spirits and to the gods. And there was this kind of recognition of the wholeness of the cycle of life, the cycle of living, and that the seasons going by year after year after year. And this is a time where you would recognize and make an offering of this wholeness of the human life. So I think that's really beautiful when we think about what does it mean to honor the Buddha's awakening. You know, one way is inquiry into our own awakening. That's one facet. But sometimes that gets a little bit too individual. Rohatsu is also about how do we honor the wholeness? How do we honor everything which is involved in the Buddha's awakening? Remember, Shakyamuni Buddha did not say, I am sitting underneath the Bodhi tree and I saw the star and I am awakened. Now I will teach people about it. Hopefully they get it too. Right? He said, I, the great earth, and all beings attain to the way at the same time. No being is left out of this awakening of the Buddha. That's the attainment of Shakyamuni Buddha. And so this sort of idea that Rohatsu, or the celebration of the Buddha's enlightenment, is only about my own individual journey, fits quite well with a very individualistic society. We like that kind of story. It's about my personal journey. But there's something more here. There's something about all of the interbeing of life, all of the interconnection, which allows life to be, or we could say is life. And what we experience as life is a festival of deep interconnection. There would be no experience without interdependence. Think about that for a second. There'd be no experience. Everything you consider about being alive all comes through experience. Right? But there would be none of that without our interdependence. Without being able to see something, there would be no faculty of cognition. Some people who I really get frustrated with a whole bunch are evolutionary psychologists. They just, but they're also really interesting. I think that's why I get frustrated with them. There's like trying to make this neat little story about how it is that our consciousness arose. And I just think like, you guys, come on. But they say some really interesting things. And one of the things that they talk about is how we would have no cognition without the world. We think like I am consciousness, and then there's a world out there that I engage. But if we look at this a little closer, no consciousness arises without encountering cognates, without encountering things that are experienced, right? The experiencing of things and my own capacity to experience, those arise together. If you think about an infant's brain, probably, the people who study it from a scientific perspective, they say there's probably a few like instincts you have. and then you have this fabulous network that knows how to mirror the world. And from that, cognition appears. Okay, why am I going on about this? I can't even remember now. Because it's so amazing. It's so amazing. Oh, because you're not alone, actually. And so to try to take up this journey as an alone person on a journey has a kind of fundamental mistake. So as we come around each year, that Rohatsu, or the Buddha's awakening, is located at this time, which is the festival of gathering together all the things of the year, to me is very inspiring and has informed the way that I think about what it means to encounter the Buddha's awakening, right? All the time, but especially at Rohatsu time, at the time of celebrating the Buddha's awakening. Offering of a whole life, which is a life that is wholly received. My life is not just my own. It is something which is wholly received. And I can offer that wholly. And from that place, the encounter with the Buddha's awakening each year can then become a deep and profound challenge. It points to the central conundrum of being alive. That I both am, as an individual, with decisions to make, a life to lead, but I also am like an illusion. I'm made up of all of this world, which I am part of. How do I harmonize those things? What is true in that seeming dichotomy, which can liberate me from either asserting my will and trying to inflict it on the world, inflict it on my life. I don't know if you've noticed, but it doesn't work all that well. It works for a while, but even when you're successful at inflicting your will and things are, you've got it, you did what you were going to do, there's this underlying anxiousness about losing it or being able to keep it going, or it's not really satisfactory in the way that you thought it was going to be when you decided that you were going to make that happen. And so even when we are successful, there's this this underlying difficulty in it. So there's a kind of struggle, there is a journey, there is an individual thing which we encounter through practice, right? That struggle, that journey, that practice, one of the great, or the great teaching of our ancestor Dogen, who established the school in Japan, is that struggle, that journey, that practice is awakening. It's not that we're going to do that and then we're going to arrive at awakening, that the practice itself is the practice of awakening. It's the practice of this deep conundrum that I am both completely present, I have a life that's flowing through right here, and that it's not just essentially my own. And that there's a great joy and ease when I can live with integrity in that truth. So, December 8th, next Sunday, we will have a ritual. I'll explain about that next week. I love ritual. Sorry for those of you who don't. But you'll come to appreciate it, I bet. If you're like, okay, we're going to offer incense again and bow. People are going to say stuff and everything else. Yeah, it's not going to be so different than all the other rituals you've been a part of. If you've been here for rituals, there's a pattern. But please bring your whole heart to that. Whether you love it or you feel a little about it, there is something that can be discovered through ritual that's quite profound. Okay, so that's next week. I do want to talk a little bit about the Buddha's awakening in relationship to what I was talking about last week in terms of two approaches that we can use to look at when we think about tradition, or we think about something like the tradition of celebrating the Buddha's awakening. And the first one I was bringing up last week was what I called the conventional or the historical understanding. That we think about, there was a person who lived in South Asia 2,500 years ago, and they did this amazing thing. And we have legends. We don't know how true they are in a historical sense, but they've been pieced together. There's oral tradition for a long time that then bled into a written tradition. Because we live in a literate world, we have a big bias about the trueness of things that are written down, and so we tend to be a little bit like, we're not sure about these oral traditions. All I have to say to you is look at the internet, and then tell me, how much do you trust the written word? All right? The fact of it being written down does not make it more trustworthy. All right? And so we don't know from a historical perspective what are all these things. Whereas very interesting to me is that place right where the oral tradition was starting to turn into a written tradition. There's a lot of scholarship around that that's very interesting, but we can glean something of the Buddha's life in a historical sense. And then we can think about what are the pieces of that journey. The Buddha was born into a family, a very successful family. He was said to have grown up and was very accomplished in all sorts of ways, was destined to be the next leader of his tribe, the Shakyas, and was completely accomplished in all of these ways, and yet was not satisfied. His capacity to rise to the occasion, to do what it was that was his to do, and to do it well, we know that about his life. Different records of the details, but. And we know that he left that life. He left the known, the world of the known, the palace of his upbringing. Not just the physical palace, which there's some question historically of whether it was a palace or not, but the fortress of what is known to be good. He had done what was to be done that is good, as it was known in his time and place, and was very accomplished at that. So we know that he left that palace of the known and the good. And we know that he searched deeply, that he practiced many kinds of yoga, particularly under two of the eminent masters of the time, was very accomplished but wasn't satisfied. And then we know he took up ascetic practices, self-mortification, until he was right upon death. But he just couldn't even die. And then we know that he remembered a doorway that he had come across as a child. And that he bathed, received nourishment from Sujata, who was a woman who lived in a nearby village where he was doing his practice. And he sat underneath the Bodhi tree. And we know that he attained to the way there. And then we know that after some time he met with his old companions in ascetic practice, and he taught them what it was that he had woken up to, and they became the first disciples of the Buddha. So again, in a historical sense, how do we know that? Do we know exactly? No. But we can have a feeling for what was this journey of this person who lived 2,500 years ago. And then to think about all of the people who have been inspired by that over the centuries, and in their own way have taken on that journey. They have said, I'm not simply going to live in the palace of what is good and known. I'm not simply going to replicate what it is that I am told I should be replicating, but that I'm going to look for this freedom which carries me beyond the kind of anxiousness and suffering which I feel right in the center of my chest if I don't learn how to live authentically, or if I'm not living authentically. Centuries of people have been taking up that same conundrum, and we are the great, we are in the place of benefiting from all that has flown down through their lives to us, whether that comes in particular practices, whether that comes in writings, different kinds of teachings, all of these explicit things, just within the culture of Buddhism, the way that we have received a way to do things, right? Different images, different teachings, different understandings, different practices. Those all have flowed to us, and they carry all of that 2,500 years. You know, it can be really hard for us to see that. We just see, oh, well, we do it this way. We prostrate. We prostrate. And we say, oh, it's just a prostration. Oh, that's an Asian thing. People will say that a lot, and I'm always like, yes, because it came to us through Asian roots, but it's actually a Buddhist thing. And it's not only a Buddhist thing, but all of these people who've been taking up that same practice of trying to discover what the Buddha practiced, they've been doing that for 2,500 years. Yeah, on the continent we call Asia mostly, but Buddhists all over that they didn't do it because they're Asian, right? So this is our confusion when it comes to tradition, and it comes to culture, and it comes to all of these dynamics that we have inside ourselves, and many of them very unskillful. But the prostration arrives to us as not just something that someone made up and people kept doing it, but the deep and profound wisdom of our tradition. I didn't know to prostrate. I had seen people prostrate, I was interested in it a little bit. But until I went to my teacher's temple, and he said, oh, sit there. Okay, I'm going to ring this bell. When we ring that bell, that means we prostrate. And we're chanting sutras, and then he rang the bell, and I jumped up to prostrate, and I fell down because my legs were asleep. It was a real prostration. It was like, it was a full hit on the ground. Anyway, but you see how that is? We receive this through them, and we don't see all the things that didn't stick. We don't really know all the things that shed away, but that prostration remained. And we don't even really see what is inside of that prostration. We can't know all of the deep intricacies of all of the prostrations of the beings that helped that prostration come into my own life. So this is receiving the wisdom of the tradition down through the ages, pouring down through the ages. It's a conventional historical way to think about it, but so important. And then it brings us to this question: how am I living out this story of the Buddha's awakening? What is your search for the Bodhi tree? What is your search for that place of awakening? And the other way I was speaking about last week is not the historical, not thinking about Shakyamuni Buddha as a person who lived 2,500 years ago and this tradition that flows down through time, but another way we can regard the Buddha is as the living Buddha. Not a Buddha that was in the past, but a Buddha that doesn't dwell in the past or the future or even the present, isn't bound by that way of segmenting time. That to encounter the Buddha's awakening, to celebrate the Buddha's awakening, are the reverberations of the unhindered heart that we call Buddha, the awakened one. Isn't confined to a living being located in time. That awakening of the Buddha. We say, you can play with the language. Oftentimes we say the Buddha awakened, right? As if the Buddha was asleep and then the Buddha awakened. You could also think about there was an awakening of the Buddha that came through this person, right? This person was always the Buddha. We people are always the Buddha. All beings, the great earth, at the same time. Right? That's what awakening is about. This center of being, the hub of the great wheel. There's one of the ways of talking about the legend of the Buddha's awakening is as he looked for the Bodhi tree, the seat of enlightenment, he came across he came to the Bodhi tree after doing a bunch of other things, which I won't talk about right now. And he came to the Bodhi tree, and he saw the tree, and he knew it was the tree of awakening. He knew it was the pivot. He knew it was the center of being. And so he went to approach the tree. And as he walks to the tree, it's like the tree is the hub of a wheel. This is how the sutras explain it. And that as he stood on the south side of the tree, that the whole universe tilted, and that he sunk down into the deepest pits, the very lowest levels of existence, and that on the north side of the tree lifted way up into the very highest levels, planes of existence. And then as he walks around the tree, the whole thing tilts with him. You can get that image, right? Like if you had a bicycle wheel and you had it on the ground, and it would turn like that as he walked around. I love that image. That this center of being is like a hub of a great wheel. It's the place from which everything turns, everything pivots. It is known as the mother of the Buddhas. That tree standing there that the Buddha sat under is the tree of wisdom. It is the eye of true seeing. That's what we're encountering in the Buddha's awakening. It doesn't come or go. It's not handed down. It doesn't flow. It doesn't do any of those things. It's boom, truth of life. Very Zen, right? Unbound, free. That our nature is free. That consciousness at its very core, in its very central place, is unhindered. It's not that we unhinder it. It is unhindered. The whole fact that we can be living is a proof of its unhinderedness. That it is not something that can be captured and corralled. Every being without exception is involved in that awakening. So the celebration becomes a question. How will you respond? So in that question of how will you respond, I'd like to just talk about a few pitfalls and a few kind of pointers. One of the really obvious pitfalls, but it's obvious, but we fall in it again and again. It's like a pit that we just like, you kind of walk up and look in and you're inside of it, you know? You don't even know how you got there, you just fell in it. It's the story of self-accomplishment. As we come on the Buddha's awakening, you will inevitably, I'm going to say inevitably, have some story in some layer of your being about how you're doing it or not doing it. Okay? If you've signed up for all 7 days of Rohatsu Sesshin and you're like, I'm not going to eat dinner and I'm going to sit late into the night every night and I'm going to get up early and I'm going to throw myself totally into that practice of just meditation for an entire week, right? Which I encourage you all to do, right? I don't want to make light of that. It's a powerful and important thing. But in doing that, if you have this story which is like, see, I'm really doing it, and then everything from there gets ranked back to the kind of like semi-version of doing Rohatsu or caring for the Buddha's awakening, you've already lost. You might as well watch football. Just for a week. Can you do that? Is that possible? Can you just watch? Well, now there's like playback things, right? You probably could do that. You know, just find something else to do. Like chill out a little bit, okay? You know? Right? That would be better if that's where you are. Now, I'm not saying you don't throw yourself in completely. That's required, right? But if you tell yourself that because I'm doing this maximum thing, that is the real practice and the other practice is not real, ask yourself, what is the Buddha's standard? Did the Buddha say, I'm sitting underneath the Bodhi tree and look at the rest of those fools? No. The Buddha said, I, the great earth, all beings. That's the Buddha's standard. 10 of 10. No one is left out. So how do you enact that kind of vigor of practice, right? If you're doing that with that heart, that the sitting of that entire week is the sitting of all beings. That's what the Buddha's inviting us, challenging us to take up. So that's one side of that pit. The other side of the pit is like, I don't know, I've never even sat a meditation retreat before. One period's plenty for me, and that's what I do, and I feel this deep importance in my life. There's something pulling on me about this practice, about what's being cared for in this tradition, right? But, I don't know that much. I haven't been that often, or maybe I've been a whole bunch, but I just, my life's not really set up, or I don't really want to do that kind of like intensive practice. Right? So what can you do? If you offer a stick of incense each day at your altar and you spend 5 minutes there and you reflect on the Buddha underneath that tree and you prostrate to that awakened being, which is none other than your own heart. Can you do that with the faith that it is real? Not to set it in juxtaposition to this idea of what the real practice is like. Right? But the freedom of simply encountering the Buddha's awakening, a very simple way. Bring an offering. Bring an offering each day. Could be, these days there's not so many flowers blooming. Maybe it's a persimmon, an apple, peanut butter toast, tea, whatever it is that you feel like, what would I bring if I came across the Buddha? What would I bring to the Buddha under the Bodhi tree? Not the big complicated thing, right? But right at hand. What do you have which you would bring and place there? And then lower your head. And every place in between. Okay, I'm picking out kind of two extreme examples to say that there's a whole continuum. And so the encounter, the celebration, and the challenge is, how do I live out the Buddha's awakening with that kind of heart each year when I come to this time of Rohatsu? And it's a time of deep reflection. How has the whole year been about all of the things of the year? All of the things of a life that's wholly received and wholly offered. Another pitfall is just to try to ignore it. Okay, it's Christmas. Okay. Yeah, that's pretty easy to do. Another pitfall is to kind of trust that story that says, my life's too complicated, or my life's too anything, right? To meet and honor this awakening of the Buddha. There's many, many more. Keep it simple and keep it true. What I mean by true is you're not leveraging it this way or that. Or I just thought of another great way you could honor the Rohatsu is each morning when you get up, go outside and look for a star. That would be really good. Any questions or comments? Hi.
I have this feeling of being pulled in many different directions, and I'm wondering how I can allow things to just unfold when there are many different options. There are so many different things. Trying to be mindful of my place and how other things are interacting, that interbeing. But being confused and scared and unsure of the unknown, of the darkness. It's a scary place to be, but I feel that there is an understanding that is what is supposed to be happening, but it is, the allowing is difficult.
So, as we're practicing the allowing, the corresponding awareness is for resonance. So there may be many, many things you're saying pulling in different directions. So part of that practice of simply being present and not grabbing one and going off with it is a deep listening for what is profoundly resonant. And that also may not be super clear. I don't mean to say if you just do that, all of a sudden you'll, bah, and this will be the one thing and it will shine and then you know everything is just this. But that you have to feel for, you're feeling for a resonance that may feel like a pull in a direction. But if we stay with the allowing practice, then we can feel it's like a vibration. It's like that's why we use the word resonance. It's like there's something in me which I see reflected in this thing, this idea or this practice or part of a tradition or a responsibility or fear even. And as we feel the resonance, we can start to see that it's not about me just moving in that direction into the dark, but that there is some self-knowledge or understanding right here moving through me. And that's how I can step forward. And now the dark is not about a place of the scary unknown, but it is that I'm walking with the light of my own being. I don't have to know what is out there to be able to walk with that assuredness. I don't have to be able to locate what is out there for my own stepping to be true. So that's part of what's happening in that process, and it is scary because there are things out there which can be very dangerous, harmful, and we're used to defending, and part of the defense is to be able to locate those things. So I'm not saying stop that completely, but to practice this acceptance and that resonance then allows for a different kind of stepping forward or a different kind of seeing, we could say. Hi.
A question about the Buddha story. So, and leaving the palace and taking up different practices and moving on, and then coming back and saying, I have something to teach you. I imagine he must have disappointed a lot of people and made some people angry and confused. So how would he have held that, and to what extent would it or would it not call into question his means and his path?
I think one of the big questions in the story of the Buddha's awakening is sometimes I'd say the most direct way that it gets brought up, just in my own heart, and then the conundrum within the Buddhist tradition is, how could he leave his wife and child? Like, come on, I don't want to do that. Not just do I not want to do it because I'm attached to my wife and my kids, but because it doesn't seem right to me. It doesn't seem like the way of spiritual journey that I want to take. So for me, that's been a deep conundrum for a long time. But in a broader sense, there's all the other responsibilities of his life. In fact, probably from his time and place, leaving his wife and child would be fairly minimal in relationship to everything else he left behind as the only son of the ruler of the Shakya clan, and his responsibility within those realms would have been much tighter bond and more central bond to the people in that society, and as we could guess to the Buddha. I mean, he named his son Fetter. Yeah, which is pretty intense, right? Or at least that's the legend, right? Later on, that's how his son's regarded, who later, both his wife and his son become his followers and become a part of the Sangha, a renunciate Sangha, and live out life as followers of the Buddha. Anyway, that question, like, what are my responsibilities in that palace, in the world of the good, in the world of the known? How much do I keep that going? And when I pull away from part of it, am I abandoning my responsibilities to the beings that, whether they're people or otherwise, that life depends on that palace, the palace of the good? To me, that I think is that kind of in the direction of where your question is?
Yeah. And the responsibility and just the, in some, I don't know if it's right to call it harm, but it's, people could have certainly experienced it that way. Definitely,
yeah. So one of the places that I work with that in my own journey, my own practice, my own struggle with all of this is the weight of that, never dismissing it, never dismissing could be harm, could be negligence that comes from turning from doing what is in the palace of the good. And that's for a couple reasons. One is that once we sort of are dismissive of it, then we become dismissive of all that swath of human life, right? And then the only real thing is the renunciate. That's the only real Buddhist path, is the path of the renunciate. And so remembering the weight of when we do turn from the palace of the good, there is real effect on the people who depend on that palace. We have to keep that really in our heart. So one reason is to realize I can't cut that off. I mean, even the Buddha couldn't totally cut it off. It had to receive food from people who were keeping the palace going, and there's a great, like, how do you stay alive in the world? Well, through alms. That was the tradition of the renunciates. So they're still relying on that in a way, but very, very, very removed. So how do we deeply stay connected to that generosity that keeps all of that going, which will be what keeps our life going? So this is one level why I think it's important. The other level, which is more personal, is to deeply love is to invite deep suffering. And for me, my choice was not to turn from that deep loving. The Buddha, in the legend of his awakening, at least outwardly we see that he did. And the intertwining of deep love and deep suffering is where the doorway, a doorway to an authentic life resides. And so in this way, the problematic quality of the story around harming and abandoning and being negligent, I'm so thankful for, because it brings me back to that very alive place, like I had to decide. In my case, it's like, okay, what, like, very practical things, like how much do I teach school to make enough money so I can buy my kids Christmas presents, or how much do I spend, doing this other, doing this spiritual practice, which I can't, I'm not going to be able to buy the presents if I just, do that. It can get down to, I mean, that's a very kind of, just an instance of the very practical, but it becomes alive in that. That becomes a really full question of a human life, rather than just kind of like, oh, well, am I going to do this or am I going to do that? What am I supposed to do? Like this kind of way we make the questions very light. It's like that becomes a life and death kind of question. And so I'm very thankful for that part of the legend for that reason, because it's how I experience it in my own life. There's always a conundrum there. What does the world need? Does it need me to make some food and give it to people? Or does it need me to say, look, it's not about food, people? It's really hard to say. It's really hard to say. Anyway, I'm just babbling now. Oh, that's helpful in some way. Probably time for one more if anyone has anything.
Quick question.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to mention one of the pitfalls that we can fall into is like this story that we tell ourselves as far as like, oh, okay, I'm too busy, I don't have enough time.
Yeah.
And then it really gained my interest because lately I've been kind of paying a lot of attention to the stories that I tell myself about my own life. And in my personal case, I've experienced that most of the stories that I've been telling myself for a long time, or I continue telling myself, it either comes from fear or desires. And one thing I've been trying to do is trying to like surrender myself and not be too much chained to my fears and desires in order to kind of get rid of this that kind of self-thing and just be a little more free. But it is not very clear to me how I can navigate myself through life without storytelling, because I think like human beings, we are naturally storytellers. So can you elaborate on the concept of desire, fear, and storytelling a little more?
Yeah. So thank you. That's very insightful. Of what you're experiencing is, I think, exactly what practice brings us to. And the medicine in practice is not that we give up on stories or that we try to get rid of all stories, right? But that we see the freedom within the stories. The thing with the stories that we tell ourselves again and again and again and again is that they're like a loop, right? And they rest on fear and desire. They rest on aversion and clinging, would be maybe another way to say it within Buddhist context. So how do we keep these things away? We've got a loop we play constantly, which is like the keep these things away loop. And then we have, these are the things I want, and we play that story on another loop to try to keep getting the things that I want. The problem is it's unreliable. It doesn't work really. And the fear that we have, those things that we want to keep away, we just replicate the problem of those things by telling the story over and over and over and over and over again. And then the things we want, by telling that story over and over again, we're never really satisfied when we do get what we want, because we got that story that's looping all the time. So the question becomes, what is the transformation of the story? Recognizing those stories, being very compassionate with the stories, not just trying to destroy them, but seeing how they're my adaptive mechanisms. For whatever reasons, I gave birth to those, out of fear and desire. Right? That doesn't make me bad. It makes me human. It makes me deluded, right? But you're in really good company on the deluded front, right? All present company included, right? We all are. So to come to those stories with that heart that can see them more clearly, but also is very compassionate with them, isn't blaming, isn't saying, oh, I wish I could just stop doing this, or I'm not good enough, or all of those kinds of things. And then the practice shows us how to do something. So like here at the time of the Buddha's awakening, every every day, starting from next week on Sunday for a week, just make a little offering. If you have do you have any kind of altar at where you live?
Yeah, I do.
Great, yeah. So if you clean up the altar, it's amazing how hard it is to keep an altar like really clean and fresh. I don't know if anyone takes up that practice. It's like amazing. You'll be like, oh, it's wonderful. And then after a week, and then you'll forget about it. And then a month later, you'll look and there'll be all these dead flowers and it'll be all dusty. And the Buddha will still be sitting there like, but it will all have kind of like gotten unfresh, And then you bring your energy back, which is great. That's the altar is so patient with us. So I would say freshen it up, and it doesn't have to be a Buddha there. It could be whatever calls to your heart, Some people would just put a rock or something that calls to them. Or people who are, we have some people in the assembly who are also part of other religious traditions. So maybe it's a crucifix or some other kind of religious significance there. So staying aware of those stories that are on the loop, being compassionate with them, and then stepping forward in a very simple way to make an offering, and then take up the practice for a week. Make a simple offering there, and then sit and reflect on, the Buddha's awakening, in whatever way that makes sense to you. And just and require yourself to stay present there for at least a few minutes. If prostrations are something that are part of feels good to you in a spiritual practice, or feels resonant with you, not necessarily good, but resonant with you, then make some prostrations. That is how stories get transformed. Is that we bring this deep part of our being, which is not trying to wrench things into a certain shape, and we bring it forward to a wisdom, a legend that carries wisdom that we can now interact with, or we can be part of, simply by participating ritually and becoming more and more part of the unfolding of the legend. So that would be my recommendation. Yeah, real
This and all our teachings are offered free of charge. If you would like to make a donation, please visit our website at buddhaeye.org and click the donate button at the top of the page. Thanks.